So you mentioned earlier that you found out you were terrible at the entrepreneurial thing. What was it that you were messing up right there from the get-go?
The list would be much shorter if I said that which I did well, which is not very much at all.
When you're driven, the need to accomplish a goal is relentless. Hard work and ambition compel you to do whatever's necessary. In my work as a personal injury trial lawyer for 18 years, it's common to meet driven people. Those with drive can have different personalities, careers, or backgrounds, but they possess one common factor. Despite their passions, driven people want to surround and motivate themselves with other driven people. If you want to learn how to overcome obstacles by learning from others, then tune in here. This is the Driven Crowd Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into episode 51 of the Driven Crowd Podcast, fueled by Snellings Law. I'm your host, Scott Snellings. Our guest today is joining us today all the way from Utah, Marco Brown. Marco grew up in a small village in Alaska called Cold Bay, population 85, where he obtained his GED before moving on to college and eventually graduating with honors from law school. Marco and his wife moved to Utah in 2010, where he started Brown Family Law with no clients and no network on the floor of their condo. Since then, Marco's been awarded Utah Family Lawyer of the Year, as voted on by his peers in the Utah Bar Association. Brown Family Law has grown and helped over 4,000 clients through divorce and family law situations in Utah and is now expanding into other states as well. Marco, welcome to the Driven Crowd Podcast, my friend.
Hey, thanks, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah. All right. So I mentioned that you grew up in Alaska, and I'm super intrigued by this. My wife and I just finished the latest True Detective series, which took place in Alaska during the stretch of time where y'all have nothing but darkness. So I assume, did you live through that? Was it like that when you were growing up where you were growing up?
Yeah. So Alaska is humongous.
Yes.
And if you overlay it on a map of the United States, it goes from the Panhandle in Florida to San Diego up to North Dakota next to Canada. So it's utterly huge. Now, in the north, in Barrow, those places, they call that city something else now. But I haven't lived there for 20 years, so I don't know what they call it. But up there, you can go for 4 to 5 months and literally never see the sun. And then you're going to have 4 or 5 months where you see the sun 24 hours a day. So I didn't have that. But I went to high school in Anchorage after we moved out of Cold Bay. And there were 4 months of the year that I literally didn't see the sun because the sun would come up from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Right.
Yeah.
And I was in school. So I was in a classroom. So like I said, 4 months that I almost never saw the sun.
Man, how did that affect you, or did it affect you?
Well, you get used to it as a kid, but it can't help but affect you, right? I mean, every bit of milk you drink in Alaska has vitamin D in it, for example.
Oh, okay.
Right? Because you just don't get vitamin D. So you literally have to supplement everything with vitamin D. And that's just kind of one example of it. But there was a lot of seasonal affect disorder, especially among adults who moved to Alaska because they weren't used to it. But if you were a kid, you're like, okay, this is kind of what you do. But there are months and months where you just stay in the house, and that's pretty difficult. Like there's no getting around it. Like we're a different breed as Alaskans, in no small part because we have to put up with stuff like that.
Yeah, no kidding. I spent my childhood growing up, and we got kicked outside every weekend. It was, hey, get outside, go play, go find friends. If you'd have cooped me up in a house for 3 months as a kid, I would have gone nuts.
Yeah.
So tell me, what was it like growing up in such a small town in the outlier state of the United States, just out there in the middle of nowhere?
So I loved it. I didn't know any different. My dad went, my parents were going to Oregon State when I was born, and my dad was getting a master's in fishery biology. So we went to Alaska right after that. And it was just normal stuff. So we lived in the boonies, and I hunted and fished and played with my dogs out there. I adored it. I thought it was great. I spent a lot of time alone, obviously, outside, just figuring stuff out and exploring, which I loved now that I look back at it, because all I did was sit and solve problems and think. And so I got to know myself really well. I got to know how my brain works. And it was all kind of prefrontal cortex stuff, the executive functioning stuff that I had to do all day long from the time I was very little. And that served me really, really well as an adult and as an attorney. But, when you're a kid, you don't realize that. You're like, oh, hey, I just don't have friends, so I'm going to make do. But it was great.
Yeah. And, I think that's such an important trait to have, because how many people do you know who cannot sit in a room alone for any stretch of time? I mean, we immediately go to our phones or to a TV or a book or something. We can't just sit there and be okay being by ourselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's interesting too when I read biographies of people that accomplish really, really big things, that one of the things I noticed is almost all of them are okay sitting there thinking their thoughts and just being in their own head. And I think it's absolutely necessary. If you don't give yourself that space, I don't think you get to know yourself. I don't think you get to know, I don't think you have the patience with yourself to accomplish big, big goals.
So, as you were growing up and kind of thinking through these things and figuring it out, where were your passions? Like, did you have a passion for, hey, one day I want to be a lawyer. One day I want to be, a dog sled guide. One day I want to be this. Where were you at that point in time?
Kind of, sort of, actually. I was a weird kid in a lot of ways, and my grandmother and it came from my family. So my grandmother was a professor when women didn't get PhDs and they weren't professors, right? Like it was a while ago, and that just wasn't done. But she was the smartest woman I've ever met in my entire life to this day. Like effortlessly intelligent. The brightest woman. She was incredible. And I was kind of wanted to be like her. And I knew that she got a doctorate, and my dad was a very educated guy. My mom was really smart. So that was just kind of what you did as family. Like I figured that out pretty early. It was about 8 when I thought through that. And I thought, okay, so I'm going to do that because this is what the family does. So then I had to think, all right, what am I going to do? And this is all like when I'm a little kid, like I said,
you had a lot of time to think.
Yeah, I had a lot of time to think. And I started thinking, like, am I going to be a scientist? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? So it was never, am I going to do this? It was like, what type of PhD or doctorate degree am I going to get? And then eventually I figured out, later on, I thought I'd be a scientist at first. I thought I'd be a physicist. But then I figured out that my temperament was not really made for that. I thought about being a psychologist, and I thought I was too combative for that. And then I figured out, as I grew older, how my head worked. And it was very much how an attorney's brain needs to work to be good as an attorney. And I thought, all right, I should probably do what my brain is really adapted for.
Yeah, that's so interesting how, as we kind of progress through and learn more about where our interests are and everything, that the things that we end up thinking that, oh, this is absolutely what I'm going to do when I grow up, tend to be things that are like, wait, I would be terrible at that. Terrible at that. Some of us figured that out sooner rather than later. I went into college, wanted to be a doctor, and that was a terrible experience for the first semester, and clearly was not cut out for that. I was a psychology major. Realized pretty quickly I would not be a very good counselor whatsoever, and so ended up I kind of fell backwards into the law. All right, so I read in the intro that you got a GED and then went on to college. What's the story with that?
So. This is the story of you can tell a story with being factually accurate and give very different impressions about it. So I
are lawyers.
Do this. I'll leave out facts because it's just a better story, right?
Yeah.
But really, when I was a kid, I was a bright kid, and I just wanted to go to college early, and I hated high school. So I actually took too many college classes, and I went in my junior year. My counselor called me in. I'm like, why is my counselor calling me in? I don't ever talk to this dude. I don't care. So I go in there, and he said, you don't have enough credits to graduate. And I said, what are you talking about? I take college classes all the time. My grades are fine. And he said, yeah, you took too many college classes, so you're going to need to go to an extra year of high school. And I think I might have told him to F off or something. I was
Yeah.
like, there's no way.
But where's the logic there,
I hate
man?
this
Come
place.
on.
Yeah, I know. It's just crazy. And that I catch hell for this, but I can't stand bureaucrats, right? Because they
Yeah.
just have worthless rules. And this is where I learned for the first time, like how stupid and worthless most bureaucrat rules are. So, yeah, I had this experience and I walked out and I said, well, no. So I literally just left. I got a scholarship to college, and then I just left high school. And I went and took my GED because they made me take it before I could get my scholarship in college.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So at what point in time did you kind of start to realize, hey, I may be not cut out to work for other people, but entrepreneurism is in my future? It sounds like you kind of already had some of that going at that point in time.
Yeah. I mean, I was always kind of a combative kid, and I didn't just accept people's rules. So that was part of it. But that got me to be a lawyer. That didn't get me to be an entrepreneur. So after I graduated from law school, I clerked for a year, which is still the best job in lawyering I've ever had. I love that job. I love my judges. I just loved everything I did in there. And then I worked for an insurance defense firm for about 18 months. And that was the worst job I've ever had in my entire life. It was just awful. There was no aspect about it that I enjoyed. But it was useful in the sense that it taught me who I didn't want to be as an attorney and what I didn't want to do. And one of the things I didn't want to do is I didn't want to work for somebody else because I was terrible at it. I had so many experiences where, again, there were just all these rules, and the rules were absolutely inane, but I had to follow them because the partner said I had to follow them. And I just thought, screw this. I hate this. I'm not doing this. And I just realized that I'm a terrible employee, and that has served me exceptionally well. Now, I kind of backdoored into entrepreneurship because I'm a terrible employee and I just couldn't work for somebody else. So I had to work for myself. And then I figured out, like, I'm not good at this entrepreneurial thing either, but I know I can't work for somebody else. So I have to get good at this.
Right.
So that's how I kind of backdoored into entrepreneurialism.
Okay.
I'm saying that word incorrectly, but
yeah, I know there's like 100 different ways to say being an entrepreneur. We'll say being an entrepreneur. All right. So you work for this insurance defense company. Is that doing personal injury work?
Yeah.
Okay. You work for them for a year and a half. Say, okay, I can't work for someone else. At that point in time, is that when you start Brown Family Law?
Yeah. So that was in New Mexico. And then my wife came to me and said, hey, I want to get a doctorate at the University of Utah. And we lived in Utah before. We went to BYU. That's where we got married. So we'd done that. And I said, great. We enjoy Utah. Let's go back up there. I want my wife to get a doctorate. And I hate my job. So let's do this thing. And that's, and that was during the recession, the Great Recession. Like, it's 2010. So it's in the middle of the Great Recession. No one is hiring. Like, there are no law firms, I think, in the United States at that point that are hiring. Like, big law firms in Miami, Chicago, New York are like going out of business. And I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this thing, I'm going to do it right now because no one's hiring me. And I've always wanted to have a firm. So let's do it.
So you were in New Mexico. Were you already licensed in Utah?
No.
So you had to take a bar exam too.
Again, bureaucracy. I freaking hate it. I spent 6 months not being able to work as an attorney because I had to go take the bar exam over again, which I had just passed 18 months previous to that.
Oh, well, is it a UBE state now? Uniform bar exam?
I think it is.
Yeah.
I try not to keep up on stuff like that, but I think that's right.
Yeah. Well, I just spoke with one of our younger associates on the podcast in the last episode, and we were talking about the bar exam a little bit. And he was one of the first crew through after Texas had joined the UBE train. So, all right. So you quit your job, you move your family, your wife is in school now. You can't practice law because you got to study for the bar exam. I assume you studied for it, passed it.
Yes.
Okay. And then you have the ability to start a law firm. You start it. Why family law? Family law is very contentious, which you already said you're a combative guy, so I get it. But I know a lot of family lawyers, and I know a whole lot of former family lawyers. So how did you get into family law?
Exactly. So most family law attorneys make it about 3 to 5 years and then they burn. Okay. But the reason I got into it is I had a friend who needed a divorce because her husband cheated on her, and I needed money. That's it. There's nothing sexy about it. There's nothing deeper.
Survival.
Like I just needed cash. So I said, cool, I'll help you out. And then the day before I met with her, I stayed up until 3:00 in the morning figuring out how to do a divorce in Utah. And then I did it and did pretty well with it. Figured out at the end that I liked how I felt when I helped her and her kids through the process. And then people just started coming in more and more, because you got to remember, I'm starting from literally zero. I have no clients, I have no money, I have no connections in this state, I have nothing. And people just started coming in more and more for family law. And I figured out that I liked it more and more, and that I was good at it. And then I figured I was really, really good at it. And I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life.
So tell me what you meant by you liked how it made you feel.
Yeah. So she needed help. She was in a bad spot. All of our clients are compromised, right? And she was compromised. And I was able to get her through that process with a minimum of fighting, and to decrease the amount of damage done to her kids. And that's how we work here. While I love the fight, I adore the fight. Cross-examination is better than sex, at least sex with me, right? Like I love it so much, but I realize that that's not good for my clients, and it's certainly not good for their kids. So we're trying to minimize that fight. And when we do that, we tend to get really good results and to help people through a really hard time. And that to me is a special feeling.
So I got a little dose of that back when I was interning in college. This is kind of how I fell backwards into going to law school. Is I happened upon an internship at a PI firm, and I got to see how much help he was able to provide for these different families who had either lost everything, had lost their health. One of the cases we worked on, 2 little girls were on their way home from Disney World with their parents, and both parents were killed in a car crash. And so just horrible things happening to people. Yet, the guy I was working with was able to guide them through that process and help them at least begin to put their lives back together. And to me, that was so fulfilling, getting to have that massive impact on someone's lives. And I think both of our practice areas are the same, in that people come to us and something really, really bad has happened, right? For me, it's physical. For you, it's emotional, it's financial. The person that they're with and they expected to be with for the rest of their lives, something has gone horribly wrong. And they come to you, in shambles. And to be able to have that feeling of walking them through that process and showing them, hey, it's going to be okay, is so fulfilling.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. It is. And it's one of the, it's really difficult, but it's one of the most satisfying things that I've ever done in my entire life. But, it's really difficult, but everything we do that's meaningful is really difficult. I can't think of a thing I've ever done in my life that wasn't really hard, that wasn't also deeply meaningful.
Absolutely. And there's a reason why this is a very stressful profession, because you take those burdens and you put them on your shoulders, and it's on you to walk them across the finish line.
Yeah. And that's why our people burn, right? That's why my colleagues tend to burn out. And thankfully, I have been blessed with a personality where I don't burn. And I'm also very, very intentional. And this is something for everybody listening, all the attorneys that are dealing with burnout. You have to be very intentional about not burning out. You have to realize and assume that you will, unless you do very specific things based on your own personality to ensure that you don't. And you have to lay those out, and you have to make those non-negotiables. And I've just been able to do that.
Yeah, 100% agree there. I have a fantastic business coach, Charlie Mann. I don't know if you know Charlie or not, but that's one of the things that I really struggled with, because, we're both go-getters. We both push. And I would push myself into the wall, essentially. And so he's really worked with me and helped me identify, okay, when are we approaching the wall? When do we need to sidestep, take a breather? And so, I plan out vacations for the following year, and we try to do something every quarter. That's not necessarily heading off to Europe, as you're about to do. We'll get to that. But it could be something like a long weekend, and making time for a day off once a month, calendaring those out and sticking to it. And having that energy, because I'm sure you're the same way, where can I go 365 days? You're absolutely bet I can. Am I going to be at my best? Nope. And so I would rather work at 90% of the time, being at 105% of what I can do, than 100% of the time being watching my power level go down along the way. So what are some of the things that you do intentionally, like specifics, to prevent burnout for yourself?
Yeah. So for me, I try to do is find the very few things that move the lever the most, right?
Yeah.
And
like
for me, that's sleeping 8 hours a night. I'm not perfect at this, but sleeping 8 hours a night really, really makes a huge difference. Then I work out about 2 hours a day, and that really helps me out a lot. Now, so I was morbidly obese when I was a kid, and I've always kind of fluctuated with weight, and I'm 47 now. So I need to spend that time exercising in order to not get fat and take care of myself. So that's another one. Then on the spiritual side, I'm a believer, and we go to church and we read scriptures and we do things to help on our spiritual side. And then travel is huge for me. I derive a humongous amount of enjoyment from exploration and travel, and just learning new things, and travel is one of the ways to do that. So we travel a lot.
And I'm curious, do the Bible study or Bible time and the workouts, is that a morning routine for you?
Yeah, so that depends. The scriptures are almost always a morning routine. I have a very difficult time reading scriptures if I don't do it in the morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can wake up at 5 a.m. and work out for 2 hours before the kids get up and really the day gets going, or I can do it from 3 to 5, which is actually when I have it scheduled in my calendar. So every day from 3 to 5, it's gym time. And it just depends on how I feel that day, whether or not I do it in the morning or I actually do it from 3 to 5.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know when I implemented my morning routine, probably, 2.5 years ago now, it was get up at 5 and the coffee's already set to brew. So it's waiting on me. And I get my Bible study time in, and then I have a home gym. So we built out in the garage a home gym. So that makes it that much easier, right? And if you're an Atomic Habits guy, make things easy and get out there, get my workout in. And after that, and I've already won 2 super important parts of the day. And then I'm energized, ready to go, hit the office. And, I've been up for several hours, and I'm sharp and ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go back to your law practice. You start eventually having more and more people contact you. At what point did you start hiring?
So I hired a contract attorney actually fairly early on just to do some drafting, because it got to the point where I had way too many clients, and we've adjusted things over the years to kind of down to a science now when it comes to numbers, but I didn't have that in the beginning. So I had at one point 112 active divorce and child custody cases.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, it was a bad idea. Don't ever do that. It's a bad idea. But I did the contract thing first, and then the contract attorney kind of moved up in hours until we got to the point where I just hired her full time.
Yeah. And so you mentioned earlier that you found out you were terrible at the entrepreneurial thing. What was it that you were messing up right there from the get-go?
The list would be much shorter if I said that which I did well, which is not very much at all.
You generated cases clearly.
What's that?
I said you generated cases clearly.
Yeah, I did. It did generate some. Yeah, it did generate cases. The one thing that I did very, very poorly, that actually when I changed this, it changed everything in my law firm, was getting paid. So I could get clients, and then I was not good at sending out invoices. I wasn't good at getting on the phone and making them pay me when they owed me money. So I was doing a lot of work for free. It was probably bringing in 50 cents on the dollar, right?
Ooh.
And if you bring in 50 cents on the dollar in any job, you're going to hate that job, and you're not going to do very well at it. So that's kind of where I was. Now, the part that I did really well on was I was a very good attorney, and I cared about my clients. So I figured that part out, and I was very, very good at that. But I always tell people this: look, you can be the best attorney in the world, but if your firm sucks and your business sucks, your life sucks.
Absolutely, yeah. And for those people who aren't in the law field, switching practice areas is incredibly difficult. You get out of law school and you know a little about a bunch of different stuff, but you don't know a lot about much of anything. And so you spent 18 months doing personal injury law, which is 110% completely different than family law. How long did it take for you to really get up to speed? I know it was more than the one night up until 3 a.m. How long did you, until you felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I don't walk into a courtroom and I'm scared that I'm going to get surprised by something just because I don't know it.
About 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember at 2 years, I thought I was in court one day and I thought, oh, this felt natural, right? I just knew, my brain knew what to do, and it kind of knew it could anticipate, it could figure things out. Yes, but it was about 2 years of every single day I was in it and thinking about it all day long.
Were you able to find any kind of a mentor, or how did you speed that learning process up for yourself?
I did not find a mentor. So I had a buddy, and we actually work together now, and I would call him all the time, but we had started kind of the same day, but he is just smarter than I am. So I would call and ask him questions a lot. And I would ask other attorneys questions, but that wasn't really how I went about doing it. I experimented a ton. So I was just wrong. I just got stuff wrong all the time. I had a lot of cases, and I spent a lot of time in the courtroom, and I thought a lot about my arguments, and I would go in and I would try it out, and I would screw it up, and then I would go back and say, okay, that didn't work, so we're going to do it this way next time. So that's how I did it, because I lacked a real mentor in that. But I'm not sure a mentor would have done a ton for me, because I still would have had to screw everything up and then fix it. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of the benefits of kind of starting out at a firm that does that practice area, is a lot of the senior associates, partners can help catch those errors before you're actually in front of the judge screwing it up. You just screw it up in front of them. And one thing it doesn't do, though, if the partners are catching it, is it doesn't develop that ability to think on your feet in front of a judge when you have screwed something up and try to rebound.
Yeah, it absolutely does not do that. In fact, when I talk with my attorneys now, because we're developing younger attorneys and so forth, I'm actually pretty, not combative, but I'm very upfront when we talk through a case. So they'll tell me their theory of the case and they'll do this. I'm like, no, that's stupid. Here's why, right? I don't always do it like that. I'm playing it up a little bit here, but I will make them justify things. Like, I'm really trying to get them to act like they're in court, and they are messing up, right? And the feedback is immediate, because that has real effect. Like the faster you do that stuff and the more you get baptized by fire, the quicker you learn. So that's what we try to do here, is to recreate that process a little bit, even though, we're not recreating my process 100%. I think that's really useful in the way we train attorneys.
My good buddy, Marcus Brock, has a saying, it's all about your time on your feet when you're running. Just keep building up. Your body gets used to it. Your body adapts to that stress. Just the longer that you're on your feet, you don't have to go fast. Just keep going forward and spend that time on your feet. Same thing for attorneys. Same thing. Just like with you. You were up, you were screwing stuff up, but your brain was learning. You were developing those neural pathways onto, oh, if this happens, then I got to do this. Probably to the point now where you don't even think about it, right? And so the more time that we were getting our attorneys on their feet, whether it be presenting training to the team, whether it be at attorney roundtables where we're having them put forth strategies and things like that, and then we're slicing and dicing what they're bringing us, or focus groups are a great place to do it as well for what we do. That is so important to just get that time on your feet, actually arguing something with immediate feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that, this is a little aside, but one of the things that really worries me about law schools nowadays is they are very much losing the Socratic method as it's supposed to be taught. There is nothing better to teach attorneys how to be effective attorneys than the Socratic method. Like challenging, doing all of these things, but they're kind of getting away from that. And I think it's a very serious disservice to law students and future lawyers.
Yeah, boy, there's nothing that makes you more uncomfortable than hearing your name and standing up and knowing that you're about to be grilled by a guy or a lady who knows way more about this topic than you do. I remember the first time I heard Mr. Snellings and I stood up, all of a sudden the oxygen seemed to get a lot thinner up there in the room. All right, so back to the firm. At what point in time did you realize, all right, I've got to have some systems, some processes, some structure about what I'm building here, as opposed to just being a practitioner who happened to run a business?
2015 is the year that happened for me.
Very specific.
Yes. No, well, it's very specific because a very specific thing happened that necessitated it. So I call this the Great Shower Incident of 2015. I had just won Divorce Attorney of the Year, and I thought that was super cool, right? And then 2 days after I got it, I had all the same problems that I had before, and they were very serious problems. I had personal problems and then, professional problems. I just didn't know what I was doing, and it was bad. So I'm in the shower around that time, and this had happened to me before, but what would happen is I'd be in the shower for about 5 minutes and I'm fine. And then I start thinking about cases and I just start getting anxious. So my chest starts to constrict, my heart palpitates, and I start getting what is going to be a stress headache that is going to envelop my entire face by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I start getting that because it starts at the crown of my head. So I start feeling all of those things. And I thought, oh man, it's happening again. Oh, I hate it because this has happened to me a lot. But this time was different. This time I was shown, and I'm being very serious about this, I was shown my future in a very, very real way. I was 60 years old, 65, and I was in a casket at my own funeral, and I was being mourned by my family, by kids that I didn't even have at that time. That was because I was looking out from the casket. And that lasted for about 10 seconds. And then I came out of it and I thought, no, that's not going to happen. But it was plain as day. I'm a believer, and it was God communicating to me literally what my future would be if I kept on the path that I was on. And I thought, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that to my family. I'm not doing that to myself. So today is the day that I change. And I had to figure out what to change because there were 1,000 problems, but you can't solve 1,000 problems. You can solve one problem. So I thought, okay, what one problem am I going to solve that can hopefully help solve a whole bunch of other problems?
There you go.
And then I thought through that, and I thought, okay, let's get paid. What's the easiest one, right, to do? And I thought, all right, well, I'm doing all this work, but I'm only getting paid 50 cents on the dollar. So why don't I get paid 100 cents on the dollar? And I had to come up with a system to make that function. So I developed the system, and again, screwed a whole bunch of things up, but eventually got to the point where we were getting paid 100 cents on the dollar. And that changed everything in my entire life. It changed the business. It changed my personal life. It changed my spiritual life. It changed everything. And then that's when I figured out, oh, okay, so these systems are really what makes or breaks the entire enterprise and lives in general. And that's when that happened, that realization right there.
I had zero business background. I mentioned I was a psychology major, never stepped foot in the business school for even a class. And, when I started my first law firm with my former partner, I didn't really handle the business side of stuff. So when I started our firm, I didn't know what I was doing on the business side per se. And so, man, I just dove in and started reading and reading and reading. And one of the things that immediately just, I'm like, okay, I got to pay attention to this because it's in literally every single book I've read is systems. You've got to have them and you've got to create them. Otherwise, you're just running around frantically. And so you realize that one issue, you solved it. Did that then lead to, oh, that one thing made my life so much better and solved so many other issues? What's the next biggest thing, and then the next biggest thing, and then the next biggest thing?
Yes. Yeah, that was the exact progression of it was, oh, hey, this was super effective. What can I do what other systems can I create to solve a problem that will then solve a whole bunch of other problems? So I've just been kind of, that's kind of how I think about things now on a regular basis is I don't want to solve a small problem. I want to solve a much bigger problem that'll solve all these other problems. And systems are the way that happens.
And so when you kind of think through your problems, do you have a problem list, or for those of us in the EOS world, an issue list that you look at? And then how often are you looking at it, and what are you doing about it?
No, not particularly. It's probably more like this thing bugs the snot out of me. And but lots of things bug me, but is this important enough and big enough to actually solve? So you got to, and I've kind of changed my thoughts about problems over the years. So you want to have certain problems, right? You want to create certain problems, and you want to solve other certain problems. So I just look through and I think, okay, what are the big problems that I never want to deal with again that I can solve? Right. And I go through and I do that. And that tends to solve a whole bunch of other problems. But then I also go back and I think, what problems do I want to create in order to grow? And then I go create those problems. So this is the way I think about problems now.
Gotcha. So when you were first starting off and you had that shower moment, and you solved that issue, I would imagine one of the other things leading to that shower moment was you had way too much on your plate in terms of responsibility. At what point in time did you kind of recognize and start participating in the power of delegation?
Yeah, so it's probably about that time. I think 16, I had one attorney back then. I think 16 is when I hired the second attorney, if I remember correctly, and then the third attorney came on the next year. So that's really when I start to delegate things out. Like I'm no longer going into court, I did the trial. Like I would delegate out the hearings, but for specific hearings, and then eventually I delegated out those specific hearings, and I would only do trials, and then eventually I just stopped doing trials, and so on and so forth. But that came, in the year subsequent to 2015.
Okay. And as you sit here today, what are your main responsibilities? What does your day-to-day look like?
So my day-to-day is I come in, I interact with my executive team, which is made up of 4 people. And then I will still do a lot of the sales and closing trainings. So because marketing. So marketing and sales and closing are the highest leverage activities that you have in your entire law firm. Because if you can't get clients in, you can't close clients, you can't help anybody, you can't make any money. Right. And why are we here if we're not here to make money and help people? So those are really, really high leverage things. And I still do that. And then much more now, I am acquiring talent, right? I'm going out there and trying to find talent and acquire talent because we're a service-based business. So we're only as good as the people providing service. And then the expansion portion of it as well. That's kind of a newer thing, but the expansion has taken up a lot of my thought process lately, like how to make that happen.
Do you have a vision or let's say 10-year plan for the firm?
Yeah, $75 million by year 10. So awesome. $75 million a year.
And so obviously expansion is going to play quite a bit of a role in that.
Yes.
As you think through expansion, obviously you're creating problems to then solve.
Mhm.
What are some of the biggest problems that you're looking at, either to create or that you see on the pretty near horizon for you?
So the biggest problem that, like, the biggest problem to solve, not create, I'll get into that in a second, but the biggest problem to solve is the talent acquisition side of things. So going into new places where I've never been, and I don't know the lawyers really, because I try to know my competition very, very well. But I'm going into new jurisdictions where I don't know the lawyers, and then trying to find talent and bring talent on. That's difficult, right? And so we're working through that. And then the creation of problems, in order to get as many clients and acquire talent, we have to get known. So we have to create the problem of getting known so much that it annoys people. Like just being ubiquitous all over the place. And that will annoy people. And colleagues, sometimes don't like that, and potential clients don't like that. But if you're going to do these things at a really high level, if you're going to get a lot of talent, you're going to get a lot of clients, you're going to have to be ubiquitous. So, we're going to have to deal with the problems that come along with that.
Yeah. As you were evaluating the new spots that you're going to be growing into, what were some of the key factors that you were looking at?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating question. Now, this is going to depend. These are for me, but everybody looking at new jurisdictions, it's really going to depend. So the way I've thought through this is there has to be a really good population base that pays attorneys money. Okay, so no stingy population bases, and growing states. So most of the growing states in the United States are in the South now. So Arizona is actually our first jurisdiction past Utah, because Arizona is a fairly fast growing state. So we're looking at places like Texas, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, these types of states. Utah, outside of Utah, sorry, but Utah is a large and growing state. So we look at that. We look at states that kind of facilitate that go along with with what we do. So there still have to be a large number of marriages, and then a corresponding number of divorces that we can help with. And some states, marriages just really aren't there. Like, people just aren't getting married that much anymore in some states. And we're probably just not going to go there, because people will pay more to break up a marriage than they will to fight over a kid when they weren't ever married. So we have to look at those things. I also want to recession-proof the law firm, because I'm not here to get rich quick. I'm here to get rich for sure, and recession-proofing is part of that. So when we look at markets, we're looking at what's the job situation. Are these recession-proof jobs? Are they good-paying jobs? Are they stable? So we're doing an economic analysis on all of those things. And then, this is more of a personal thing, but I'm very upfront about who I am as a human being. I live out loud. For example, I named my second child after Antonin Scalia and Teddy Roosevelt. So I'm a conservative guy. And I really don't want to go play in New Jersey or in New York or in Illinois or California, where I'm not particularly appreciated and my views aren't particularly appreciated. So, but I get to make those decisions because I own a law firm, right?
Yeah.
So that's how those are some of the metrics that we use when we look to new jurisdictions.
Awesome. Marco, I feel like we just got started. We're out of time, my friend. I do have one more question for you, though. I always end the podcast asking 3 favorite books. Could be fiction, nonfiction, doesn't matter.
Okay, so my favorite fiction book is the Trial by Franz Kafka, single best novel ever penned by a human being. And then my nonfiction book is, I will say, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. Theodore Roosevelt, dude's like Batman. He lived such an amazing life. I adore reading about Teddy Roosevelt, man. And I named my kid after him. And then the third, I'll do a business book. Best business book I've ever read. I've read it 24 times, is The Closer Survival Guide by Grant Cardone.
Awesome. Yeah, you had those at the tip of your tongue. Usually that takes people a little while to come up with. Well, Marco, thanks again so much. Yeah. Hey, I do too. Marco, thank you so much for being with us today. And thank you everyone for tuning in to another episode of the Driven Crowd Podcast. We'll see you next time.